That morning began like so many others, cloaked in the false normalcy of a city waking under the gentle autumn mist. Charleston was still yawning beneath the glow of streetlights when Celeste Monroe parked her silver Buick in the side lot of the federal courthouse. The radio was still whispering a snippet of old jazz when she turned off the engine and took a deep breath, as if she already knew this would not be an ordinary day. She adjusted the cuffs of her navy blazer, gathered her leather briefcase with her documents, and stepped out of the car with the poise of someone who knew exactly where she belonged, but was in no hurry to get there. Each step toward the courthouse steps was a silent affirmation. She didn't wear her robe outside the courtroom. Never had. She preferred to be mistaken for any ordinary citizen, not out of vanity or insecurity, but out of a habit of observation. But on that day, anonymity would not be a shield. It would be a target. At the main entrance, the air began to shift. Celeste's presence, a black woman, well-dressed, walking with confidence, caused immediate discomfort among those guarding the gates of power. The security officer, Hank Riker, a burly man with narrow eyes and a hard face, raised his hand as if stopping a threat. "I need you to step out of line, ma'am," he said without even waiting for her to introduce herself. Celeste, with the calm of someone who had faced this kind of approach before, responded simply, "Is there a problem, officer?" He didn't answer immediately, just scrutinized her with eyes that treated her existence as an affront to order. His gaze slid from her gray braids, neatly pulled back, to her perfectly polished shoes, and something about that image deeply unsettled him. Perhaps it was the fact that she didn't seem out of place. She seemed to belong there. And for men like Riker, that was unacceptable. Celeste pulled her badge from the inner pocket of her blazer with the tranquility of someone who knows the authority they carry. The golden insignia gleamed under the cold lights of the scanner. Riker took the document without even looking at it properly, stuffing it into his pocket as if it were a mere flyer. "I want my badge back," she said firmly. He stepped closer than necessary. "In a hurry, sweetheart? You'll have to go through our protocols," he growled. And before Celeste could respond, he was already forcibly leading her down a side corridor, away from the main flow of entry. "This isn't right. I don't authorize this," she protested. But her words vanished among the windowless walls of the secondary screening room. There, in that frigid, sterile room where even the light seemed reluctant to linger, Celeste's dignity began to be dismantled. Riker called in two other officers, a pale-faced man with a slight tremor in his hands, and a woman who avoided making eye contact with anyone present. "Sit," Riker ordered. "This is an abuse of authority," Celeste declared, without raising her voice. He responded by turning on the inspection machine, and beside it, on a small steel counter, a pair of hair clippers were already prepared. The metallic hum filled the room, a sound that felt more like punishment than protocol. "You might be hiding something in those braids," he said, almost with satisfaction, before pulling out the first strands. The first tuft fell with a weight that was more than physical. Each severed braid carried years of memory, resistance, ancestry. Celeste didn't scream. She didn't plead. She didn't move a muscle beyond her eyes, which remained fixed on an invisible point on the wall in front of her. The humiliation was meticulous, timed, cruel. When it was over, Riker brushed his hands over his uniform, sweeping away the strands as if clearing dust. "Now you're presentable," he said, laughing. Celeste stood with slow movements. She retrieved her badge without asking permission, and she left the room in silence. In the courthouse corridors, no one recognized her, or if they did, they made no effort to show it. Two administrative staff members averted their eyes as she passed. It was as if the silence had been agreed upon, as if they had collectively decided that what they had witnessed didn't warrant comment. But Celeste no longer walked as she had before. Her steps, still firm, now carried a different weight. A silent fury grew within her, not as an explosion, but as a glowing core of purpose. She didn't enter through the back that day. She didn't use the entrance reserved for judges, where her robe awaited, carefully pressed by one of her assistants. Instead, she pushed open the main doors of the courthouse with both hands, as if clearing a path for truth, not for theater. The murmurs ceased. Conversations fell silent. Everyone saw her. Everyone understood. The woman who had been led away as a suspect, humiliated as an unwanted presence, was the judge presiding over that federal trial. The seat behind the bench was empty, until that moment. Celeste crossed the room through rows of lawyers, journalists, public representatives, and community members. The tension transformed into a rare kind of silence, the kind that announces something is about to change forever. When she finally stood behind the judge's chair, she took a deep breath, not as someone needing courage, but as someone preparing to set a new standard. She donned her robe without assistance. Each movement was deliberately calculated, as if she were putting on armor. She sat, straightened her back, looked at the crowd without blinking. "Is everything ready?" she asked the clerk. His voice trembled, but he replied, "Yes, Your Honor." Celeste nodded. "Then let us begin." The first words of the trial seemed to break a spell. The room, which had felt suspended in time, began to breathe again. But the breathing was different, more restrained, more aware. They were all there, but nothing was as it had been. The courtroom felt smaller, more confined, as if the air had thickened with the weight of what was to come. Celeste observed each face before her with a clarity that stung. She knew there were accomplices to the silence, defenders of omission, direct beneficiaries of the structure that allowed men like Riker to reign without consequence. But there were also eyes that glimmered with a new kind of hope. Restrained, uncertain, but real. They were testing the limits of what was possible, and Celeste would be the benchmark. "I call to the stand the first officer involved in the Franklin Square operation," said the prosecutor. A middle-aged man with a stern face and nervous eyes stepped up to the podium with steps that betrayed an old discomfort. It was Lieutenant Albert Shaw, the same man who had been filmed pushing an elderly woman during a peaceful protest. The video had circulated, sparking outrage on social media, but no effective action had been taken. Until now. Celeste listened in silence. She took notes, cross-referenced mentally, but didn't interrupt. She let each word come out as if from a poorly rehearsed script, full of jargon and tactical justifications. When he claimed the elderly woman posed a potential threat due to refusal to disperse, Celeste raised her eyes and fixed them on him with intensity. "Lieutenant Shaw, the woman in question was 74 years old and used a walker. Do you confirm that you classified her as a threat?" Her voice was calm, but there was something in it that tightened the air around them. Shaw hesitated. "Based on protocol, yes." Celeste didn't need to say more. The weight of those words, spoken publicly, under oath, would fall like an anchor over the entire process. In the back of the room, Celeste noticed Riker, still stationed at the side as if he still had some function there. He tried to hide in his own presence, hands trembling, gaze averted. He knew his moment was approaching, and so did she. After Shaw's testimony, a brief recess was declared. Everyone stood slowly, some still shocked by the coldness of the statements. Celeste remained seated. She was absorbed, not in exhaustion, but in strategy. She knew the next stage would require more than legal expertise. It would demand soul, courage, and a precise dose of controlled indignation. When the room partially emptied, Celeste called the clerk and asked him to notify Riker to present himself at the center of the court. The man paled, as if the blood had abandoned him right there in front of everyone. "Deputy Riker," she said firmly, "state your full name for the record." He tried to swallow dryly. Hank Riker. "How long have you served in this court?" 14 years, Your Honor." Celeste leaned slightly over her notepad. "And in those 14 years, how many times have you been formally accused of abusive conduct against black women?" He didn't answer. Murmurs filled the room. "There were 12 official complaints," Celeste continued, "in addition to at least 20 informal reports that were ignored or summarily dismissed." Riker began to justify himself. "I didn't know who you were. I thought—" But Celeste cut him off. "And that's precisely the problem. You didn't need to know who I was. It was enough to see what I am. A human being, a citizen, a black woman who dared to enter a place where you thought she didn't belong." The room froze. The silence wasn't empty. It was dense, filled with things long left unsaid. "Your behavior, Mr. Riker, was not only brutal. It was symptomatic of a system that chooses who deserves respect based on appearance, color, or assumptions of power." 2 officers approached as she announced, "As of this moment, you are suspended from all duties and will be formally investigated for violating civil rights, abuse of authority, and assault against a federal judge. The impact of those words was the equivalent of a moral earthquake. Riker was handcuffed right there, under everyone's gaze. There were no shouts, no protests. There were only witnesses, and witnesses are the beginning of any real transformation. After the recess, the next witness called was Denise Talley, a former employee of the court's records department. Denise walked with the firmness of someone who had guarded truths for too long. I worked for 8 years in the records department, and yes, I witnessed the disappearance of complaints. Some were marked as resolved without ever being investigated. Others simply vanished from the system. "And who ordered these alterations?" asked the prosecutor. Denise hesitated, then stated firmly, "Judge Terrence Mahoney." The name landed like thunder. Mahoney was more than a respected judge. He was an institution, Celeste's mentor, a beloved public figure, and, as it now seemed, one of those keeping the wheel of impunity turning. Celeste showed no sign of being shaken, but her stomach churned inside. This was more than personal. It was the exposure of an institutional web of complicity that allowed men like Riker to flourish. She thanked the witness with a nod and declared another pause. In her chambers, alone for a few moments, she opened the drawer where a brown envelope had been placed hours earlier by a court employee, one of the discreet ones who always went unnoticed. Inside were copies of all 12 complaints against Riker, stamped with "dismissed," "without merit," and "not substantiated," all signed by Mahoney. And at the bottom of the envelope, a personal note from him, written 5 years ago. "Riker may be harsh, but he knows how to maintain order, especially with certain groups." The sentence burned like acid. There, laid bare in ink and paper, was the heart of the problem. Order was more important than justice, and certain people, certain bodies, certain skin tones were seen as inherently disruptive. Celeste took a deep breath. Those documents would go into the case. She would break the pact of silence, one by one. When the session resumed, the crowd had doubled. Young law students squeezed into the galleries. Seasoned lawyers whispered in the corridors. Social media was already buzzing with live streams. Celeste walked to the bench and opened the session with a firm gavel. "This court will no longer be complicit in institutional negligence," she declared. "All documents related to the complaints against Mr. Riker will be entered into the record, along with the names of those responsible for ignoring them." A defense attorney stood with an accusatory tone. "Your Honor, your presence in this case compromises your impartiality." Celeste didn't flinch. "Are you saying that because I was assaulted by one of the defendants, I cannot administer justice? That a wounded woman loses her capacity to be just? Or are you simply uncomfortable with the fact that, this time, the wounded woman can speak?" The room erupted in deafening silence, and there it was. Once again, Celeste's strength. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't beg for credibility. She claimed space, with her voice, her presence, her history, and she made it both a shield and a sword. The trial continued with more testimonies from victims, former employees, past officers, and what had once been an isolated case now became a symbol of something much larger, the collapse of an entire culture of impunity. When Celeste Monroe rose from her chair in that final session, she wasn't just a judge closing a trial. She was a woman who had navigated institutional violence, defied collective silence, and torn through the veil of impunity with her own dignity. She didn't ask for applause. She simply announced, with a steady voice, that justice, from that day forward, would have a new face. The room fell silent, not out of fear, but out of respect, because everyone there knew they had witnessed the birth of something irreversible. And Celeste, with her head held high, simply said, "Justice is not a symbol. It is an act, and it has begun."